Somonai Breathhart here with the next part of Mandark by Richard Sharpe Shaver, 1947, from the Shaver Mystery Magazine, Volume 1, Number 1. The Foreword. Reality. Is it a horror? To all you young idealists, there will come a time when all those things you think of life with your bright, trusting and believing eyes will become dust and slime. A time when you will understand the terrible and stupid horror that life may be in reality. Life is a scream in the face of a mad brightness then. Life is a silly sound like a death rattle from an insane clown dying in the night then. Life is a place where the books still preach that death and morbid foolishness and churchyard fears and open graves are sense, that to shiver at ghost stories and to half believe in them is not foolishness. Life is a place where all you have learned as sound wisdom is not wisdom at all when you come to a need to use that wisdom. Because there is, in truth, a supernatural something that mocks at life. When you meet face to face, that something that comes and goes through locks and bars and wisdom's pale fences of flimsy, unsound logic, you learn that this thing is a powerful stupidity that mocks all your bright ideals with a smothering, mad will in the night, a will that takes your best out of your body and leaves a nothing in you that yet wants to live more, but is afraid to live. To each of you will come at last an apparition, wearing, like Scrooge, his chains, a mask of terror that hides a deep basic stupidity, a dumbness that is deeper than human. Then, like ignorant medieval people, you will believe in elemental spirits, but it is not so. They have life, those things, just as you have life, but they are not understood and are so terribly feared that men will neither speak of them or write of them openly, but always with a hedge of protection, a flimsy barricade of fiction to hide their belief from men who do not believe. Or is it to hide their knowledge from the thing itself? They are talked of openly only between men who do know them and know that the other knows too. Mostly these men think of them as witches and warlocks and such foolishness of the weak mind of men. I give you the open truth. It is not pretty, but it is wise to know this truth and not stumble upon this horror unprepared only by the works of the learned idiots who have never experienced Fortean phenomena. Editor's note: Fortean, that's Charles Fort, who wrote some extraordinary things down about his discoveries way back in the 1800s, late 1800s, I think early 1900s as well. Several books, his works can still be found. End note. Beside this horror that exists mysteriously, there is also the horror that is the plain face of life itself, when looked at in certain revealing lights. To all young men and women who dream will come at last the awful dream that is the face of truth. A true vision will show them life as a morbid horror, and themselves as a madman speck upon earth's surface as a fly upon paper. This is the disillusion, and I give you an armour of proof against it. That armour is an exact, obviously correct explanation of what this disillusion consists. You will need this armour on that day when you know that you are a living thing that must die, because your feet are so firmly fastened in the mud of earth, that you must die and gasp out your life at the last without ever attaining one bright fulfilment of one brave dream. We must each one day look upon this awful face of truth. When that time comes and you know that yourself is the man who is growing old and shaky, and that all those things you have worked away your life to accomplish will never become to you anything but a sad waste of the bright hours of your lifetime, that day you will be definitely glad you have read this book. That day you will need the bright light of this book, Mandark, to save you from leaping thankfully into death. Mandark tells you why life seems a darkness, why reality is a fearful thing we turn our minds away from. For there is something in life to work for if enough people can be brave and wise. But somehow we never have the leaders of broad and swift vision to lead us to the reality of those things we know are best, but somehow never strive toward, because we are led towards more futile, life-wasting efforts. Mandark, if you understood, can set you free of disillusion. Then when you see the green, dull face of death mouldering, your wisdom can face it with a face as brightly laughing as the face of a child. We know the child laughs only because it does not know that life is only a doorway to death, that life brings always death. For our life seems even to our wisest men, by their writings, but fertilizing for the dark fields of death. That our life has been before and can be again, much more than that, they do not see. The awfulness of truth's sad face that peers out at we who write of reality and are called madmen, liars, and various other names less attractive for reminding men that reality has vastly more to it than the bright foolish image in a kitten's eyes, that they do not see. Or that the eyes of a drunken youth recognise only those things the youth wishes to see, and that all youth is so drunk with life energy as to notice only that drunken untruth. Men do not wish to think of dying until they must. How then can death be argued with if men fear to face him with direct, courageous thought? The reality says life travels only to death, and all the maundering of the religious calling on heaven as their witness as if they could ever believe the heaven really existed, calling on the goodness of a God who, they say, is cognizant of earth and all earth's madness and all our need of the things that a God would supply, seems only to prove to the wise and honest man that there is no God, that religious people are either liars or madmen. This God that does nothing that we can see but commiserate us through the mealy mouth of a mockingly unbelieving and obviously lying religion preacher and priest, all our lives this God of theirs mockingly ignores all our needs. And we wait in our terrible need for the work of this God, and get instead the loud daily shouts of hypocrites or madmen over our radios and out of their pulpits. When one speaks of this with honest, careful words, one hears shouts of liar from these self-same liars, as if a God existed anywhere who is responsible for this madness, our earth life. The other gods would kill him the first whiff of a concentration camp, the first smell of the smoke of a Nazi slaughter camp. He cannot exist if God exists at all. Editor's note. Richard Shaver writing this, 1947. Right, it's at the peak of propaganda by the Jewish factions in America that were ruling Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin. And that propaganda continues today, that the Germans, or Nazis, the naughty, bad, evil, wicked Nazis, were real, and that the Holocaust was real, and that's all been undone. It's been categorically proven to be all just nonsense, rubbish published by the outlets of the World Jewish League agenda, which is the agenda that we have seen ever since World War II. Since then, we have seen countless numbers of wars and continuous degradation of basic freedoms of man. So the freedoms that many a young woman and many young men went off to die for, it was all a lie. And where did this lie come from? Well, that's what you're about to find out, because that's what this book is about. This book is about where the lie comes from. End note. With all the mealy mouths of mad preachers telling us sadly that when we die, we will be made to play upon a harp up in the incomparable land within the pearly gates, and that the misery of life is explainable as a testing of something or other that none of them has ever seen, but which they are all quite ready to swear exists, the soul, What is an honest man to do? That the misery of life is explainable as a testing of a something none of them has ever seen or can ever demonstrate to exist, yet of course they believe in it. Sure they do. Pass the plate, suckers. The sad, mad face of our ancient pagan Mother Earth, that ghost who still has demonstrable power. Witness, who does bear up our feet? Who is the biggest thing in sight? What greater mother can take the searing rays of sunlight and make them into the sweet magic of a May morning for children and sweethearts and puppies and wise old men who love their Mother Earth? What does she think of them who deny her? This book contains the dark truths of hell, as well as the bright faces of the true gods of the past. It will leave you better armoured to face the rigours of courageous seeing of the realities of life. End of the foreword. Mandark by Richard Sharpe Shaver. Beginning a 200,000-word novel. The true thought record story of the life of Christ. Chapter 1. The Dream. Once I was just a person, as you probably are. Then, one hot night, I had a dream. Let me tell you that dream and what it did to me. Unlike the need cypress trees, the lilies sway softly. Red are their faces, and their leaves black. Their anthers protrude like the tongues of little snakes, darting quickly from side to side. The poisonous white pistil writhes as though in pain of waiting like the single fang of the horned snake, poised to pour forth death. The cypress limbs drip soft grey sounds, and slow winds coil through the shrouding mist. The heavy orchids lean their faces to be seen, their dangling roots of white and vague like unseen thoughts that they have yet to feel life. Their blooms are purple and gold, with light pale stalks of green mottled with the swamp death. The black water ripples silently, heavily. Under the rings of ripples move the gaping mouths of great serpents, hungry for life to engulf. The acids of despair seem to distill slowly down the great stalks of starving plants. Groping through the mist, her whitely gleaming flanks spattered with the green mud, her hair hanging like wild flames over her firm young breasts, comes Nydia. About her the vast and swaying silence of the swamp, the slow rustle of the curving leaves, the gentle stretching of the reaching tendrils, the heavy, subtle scent of the slow poison that is the breath of the swamp, the touching of the pale leaves to her shrinking skin, all seemed too loud a thing, weighed with fear, for such is flight. No more would she preside at the hidden festivals of the Dark One. The time when she was looked up to as the receptacle of the lore of the ancients was gone. Now the Dark One, whom she had served so long, was called a devil, and his servitors were hunted as witches or sorcerers. Editor's note. Footnote. Author's footnote. The Dark One. To you men who still worship and prostrate yourselves before the dark spirit of Satan, and take the childish pranks and listless cruelties of unseen beings as the work of Satan's spirits, I say it is not true. There is no magic, only the existence of a lost science that builds great mechanisms that can still cause phenomena that seem magic even to modern minds. But they are not magic. Many of those machines could be built by today's science did modern man's mind happen to turn in that direction. To you who serve the underworld, the elder world, I say, serve those men of the darkness who serve the future, and to hell with the mummery and secrecy of the past. Serve science, even the seeming child science of the surface world, and the results will be vastly more valuable than all the mummery and stim of the witches of evil. Free man from the curse of the ancient black magic forever. Give him the workings of those antique mechanisms, and let his science reproduce the wonders of the far past once again. Why do you still hide all that light under the secrecy that has shrouded the greatest wonders of earth life from the man of the past? Well, it shall not shroud the wonder that must be in the future. It shall contribute its mighty part. That mech in the caves must be studied by modern science, and must be no longer wholly hidden. Why have you not done this, if you think, men of darkness? End of footnote. Now I was no longer living, and poisonous mists of some swamp caressing the muddy flanks of a fleeing witch, but was a man myself turning a corner into a darkened street. There was a strange and furtive quietness about these streets. The gloom was thick and viscous, filled with a summer sensuality, as of a great night-blooming flower's heavy odour. A woman's white face floated before me, the dark red lips hanging like moist fruit, her teeth gleaming. A husky whisper importuned, and I followed. Nydia. The air was heavy with my sensual thinking, or was it the thinking of the whole city? A dark and ancient and red being permeated these houses and streets, a hanging odour of coiling, strangling caresses, of strange orgies and stranger visions. Every past image of the desired bodies of women, all women I had ever known, stretched out their hands to me, and writhed gleaming limbs in a slow dance of longing, holding their red-tipped breasts tightly with their spread hands, as though to keep the growing buds from blooming suddenly into some wild flowering of culmination. And all their faces were Nydia. I awoke and lay there for a long time, and dawn slowly brightened my window. All my mind was occupied with wonder. Who was this Nydia? As I said before, once I was just such a person as yourself. I thought that people were lying and preachers were raving or lying when they said they saw God or angels or ghosts, when they said they had been hexed or jinxed or heard voices they couldn't explain. Then this dream happened. It was a terrible dream of a witch with whom I was apparently in love. I had been reading about such a witch called the Watcher, who had been active in medieval Spain. During the dream I had thrashed about, it seemed, either in fear or in an attempt to follow the floating face of Nydia. During the bodily activity of the dream, I must have overturned my urinal, which was in the usual place in country homes, under my bed. We called it a pot or a thunder mug. The liquid spread over the solid colour brown linoleum, and it spread in a large puddle about 6 feet by 4 beside my bed. The next morning when I awoke, the urine had dried, and upon it was a vivid photograph of the witch I had thought existed only inside my mind in the dream. I knew enough about chemistry to know that a large number of chemicals will respond in a similar way to silver salts if conditions are right. Evidently, conditions had been very right, and the only light that had struck that urine before it had dried in the darkness had been the image of the witch. I knew that someone, some way, had been foisting actual projections on the image of a witch upon my sleep as a dream. It is a strangely vivid dream that leaves a life-size photograph upon the floor for a souvenir. I called my friend from the next room. I said, "Do you see it?" and pointed at the photograph upon the floor. "Yes," he answered. "I didn't know you were an artist, but isn't it a disgusting medium?" "I didn't draw the damn thing. It is an actual photograph of a dream of a witch I had last night. How in Hades do you explain it?" He didn't believe me, and after the urine was cleaned away, we both refrained from speaking of the weird occurrence. He from a fear that I would be thought slipping my mental moorings, and I from a fear that I was. Eventually I forgot the thing, but it left a peculiar doubt of life's accepted beliefs in my mind. The pragmatic base of my life, I thought, had been severely shaken. Well, keep your feet on the ground. It wasn't a ghost that had inadvertently photographed itself upon my floor. The phenomenon originated in the work of a living person, right enough. But when I finally learned of the mischievous elfin visitor and her incredible history and background, where she lived and where her kind came from, ... The next occurrence on my path to a strange and terrible discovery of my hidden visitors, who were to become both my friends and my enemies, the secret evil and as secret kindnesses hidden from our supposedly sane modern life, happened just as simply from as common vulgar things around me, which suddenly opened upon a terrible vista of unknown life. I was working in the factory Footnote. Norse legends of clever dwarves who could build anything, flying ships, Thor's hammer, etc. How else could this be done except in the elder race machine shops? I have seen some terrifically complex weaving machines, shuttles like little metal hands on rods, etc. End footnote. It was the original Ford plant in Highland Park, Detroit. Some of the men there will remember me. Overhead, conveyors shot diagonally across the spaces which are the light wells. Around me were welding jigs, and every few seconds I had to duck a welding gun. 2 of them hung on swivels and were used in succession for 2 different sizes and shapes of welds. This swinging gun timed our action, gave a pulsating rhythm to our movements, but no matter. I was the man doing the welding. I grabbed the gun as it swung, welded, pushed it away, and ducked its mate as it swung into position over me, then straightened and shot the juice to the next weld. It gets tiresome after a while, and when you forget to duck, you get a crack on the head from the heavy gun. When the funny stuff began, at first I thought it was the occasional bump on the head that had me slap happy. But the hearing came only with one of the guns, so that ruled that out. I began to notice something very strange about one of the guns. Whenever I held it, I heard voices, far-off voices of endless complexity. When I changed to the other gun of the pair, I heard nothing. Then I grabbed the gun again as it came around, and right away I knew what was in Bill's lunchbox, which girl Bumpy was going to take out that night, what Hank's mother was planning on for his wife. It was a dress, and quite a dress too. More, I knew what the men upstairs were griping about. I heard everything I didn't want to hear all over the factory. That welding gun was, by some freak of its coils, field attunement, not a radio, but a tele-radio. A thought augmenter of some power. After a while, I found I could read the thought of nearly everyone in the building if they were standing near the wires leading to my gun from the transformers off upstairs. For several hundred feet I was a Dunninger of the mind, and I fooled plenty of the fellows by telling them what they were thinking. But at last it began to get on my nerves. I'll tell you why. I began to hear thought. I couldn't figure it out. I would hear a mean kind of voice say, "Put her on the target." Then I would hear a woman's screams, louder and louder, and more agony in the screams. And at last a gurgle, a death rattle. Then later, I would hear some person thinking about a spaceship. Not a new spaceship, but an old one. One he had been out in space with. What he thought about it was too much for me, but he knew plenty about electrics that I did not. I would hear a woman cursing and the lash of a whip, and feel a pleasure in the scream of the person getting the lash. It was all so mad, but I kept hearing such things over and over. It got on my nerves, so I quit. I quit and went on the bum, for I didn't feel like working anymore, because I believed, I knew, I heard the voices, and that if that was what telepathy gave a man to hear in America, I was not going to work for America. I was a smart guy. And pretty soon I was running a liquor truck between Detroit and Toledo. Easy money. And I had the satisfaction of knowing I wasn't a sucker for any hidden bunch of devils like I figured was running America from what I heard. Editor's note. So we're talking about a liquor truck run that would have been illegal alcohol back in those days in America. Whiskey. Well, so far I end note. Well, so far I haven't said much, but wait, and I'm not telling you any fancy lies either. You may think so for a while, till you see what I'm driving at. Well, like all smart guys, I wound up with a lot of iron bars around me, which wasn't too bad till I began to hear thought again without a welding gun within miles of me. Iron bars around me, in other words, he was locked behind iron bars. Then for a while I knew I was nuts. I knew I was nuts. I kept it quiet. I didn't say a word about it. If I was insane, I figured it was my business. Then I began to feel pains, and the thought in my head kept laughing at me, like an imp from hell would laugh. Footnote on the word hell. To walk and know that every step is watched by a mad thing, a thing without thought except to harm, to torment, to kill, a thing with the vast and mysterious weapons of a god at his fingertips, and the brains of a blood-crazed fish. That is the life of luckless individuals who know the truth of the ancient caverns in which such things live. That has been the fate of certain luckless individuals since earliest times on earth. It is supposed to be the fate of those who might divulge the ancient secret, but the mad ones, as often as not, torment ignorant innocence. Many men who could have told this story better than I did not, because men are happier not knowing the hopeless truth, or because they feared this fate of the follower. They have had many names. Maupassant called them the hauler. Maupassant is spelt Maupassant, and that looks like a French name. So you can look that one up. The hauler, Horla, hauler. End editor's note. But I think that those who know and yet take this defeatist attitude are wrong. Once it may have been better not to know that the Ifrits, demons and goblins and whatnot, whom some heard and talked to, were real living fleshly beings, not spirits at all. Today there are many, as there were in the Dark Ages, who know something of these terrible truths of the past that still live to plague and waste man life. But today is different. This modern man has the beginnings of a science that may one day eclipse the elder science by far. Those beginnings are not to be squandered by the madness, the maundering cruelties of unseen things who have no true mind. End of footnote. The pains got worse. Finally, I knew what it was, but I didn't believe it. It was people living in caves under and around the prison. And the people's kids liked to torment us prisoners. Not just pester, but real, genuine torture done with some kind of X-rays. At last I got mentally used to knowing this, for I finally got wise to a couple of other sufferers from the unseen rays, and we could get off in a corner and discuss the thing, so I didn't feel so alone or so nuts about it all. We all knew that something was very wrong about ordinary people's ideas of what the world was like. I realised that modern science must have developed a lot of secret things that rich people had got hold of and were keeping from common people. I finally was quite sure I knew all about the crooked secret ray business, but I was wrong. How wrong? That idea that modern science was responsible for my misery was. Yes. I figured maybe the communists were right. At last, after what seemed like centuries of torment, but was really less than 2 years, something happened, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. A change came over the people in the caves, of whom we only knew through their rays. Somebody got their number and really began to make them behave. I figured the lawmen got hold of some of the ray and were giving them what for, but I was wrong again. One result of the change was a sudden access of pleasure rays. I learned that for every pain ray, those secret people had a dozen infinitely pleasant rays. They called it stim. Footnote on the word stim as in stimulation. Footnote 4. Around Nydia was all the machinery of a god's pleasures. The very air could be saturated with both nutrient vapour and beneficial vibrance, as well as vibrance designed purely for pleasure, as is our music of sounds. The nature of these vibrants I can best describe by telling you that the stimulation you receive from the embrace of the woman you love is due to the body electric that the millions of tiny batteries, which are the body cells, give off. The Titan and Atlan, the two main elder races, scientists could and did synthesize all such vibrance and many others for which the machinery still exists. A great many of their mechanisms exist still in the deep so-called hidden caverns and are in use today, for the machines were built of imperishable metals, and many such machines are sheathed in solid gold. No words can describe the pleasure which a room full of these various vibrants or synthetic pleasure nerve waves can give a mere man. Multiply the embrace of the finest woman, you know, by 1,000,000 powers, and you have a vague idea of the nirvana which the Titan and Atlan races accepted as normal living conditions. A far cry from our heating stove was the apparatus around which the Titan's family gathered. End of footnote. Okay. I learned that for every pain ray, those secret people had a dozen infinitely pleasant rays. They called it stim, and woke me every morning with floods of the most delicious sensations on earth. Stim is like a young girl's kiss augmented by magic to 1,000,000 powers. One of the young ray people was a girl who seemed to fall for me. She especially dished out this stim ray to me. There is no value on earth so great as stim love. Her name was Nydia. Our love became a great overpowering force that ruled us day and night. It could not go on apart, and she was not going to let it. But, of course, I was mad and dreaming by day as well as by night. For this happened. One night, about 1 a.m., my cell door opened. I sat up, astonished. What did the screws want with me this time of night? But the turnkey stood just outside the door, a dazed, zombie expression on his face. I thought he was walking in his sleep, till I saw behind him the transparent image, the half-existent projection I had learned to love as my girl of the secret people. The luscious, laughing face of my friend resolved my mind of worry or astonishment. It was all just play to her, but to me it was the door to freedom. She wasn't there in person, but the next best thing, a transparent projection of herself. I was going to her, I knew. By controlling rays of the mechanism of their secret science, she had imposed her thoughts upon the mind of the turnkey in such strength that his own were powerless, being so much weaker. Merely by thinking over the ray with the terrific augmentation of the street thought radio, she made the unconscious screw unlock the door of the cell. He led me to a little used side door and let me out into the night, unobserved by anyone else. Footnote on controlling rays. This antique device has been used since prehistoric times by the hidden peoples to produce the phenomenon called possession. Possessed of a devil, spirit possession, etc. It is a conductive ray of similar nature to the shortwave electric flows which are our nerve messages and our thought. Manufactured by the mechanism to bear the messages of thought from the origin to receptor, They can be used to superimpose such thought upon a man's mind and body in such strength that his body and his mind do as the thought message dictates, for it is far stronger in quantity than the product of his own mind and nervous energy. It is still so used today, but the luckless murdered by control today has no such excuse of possession as was used in medieval times. He just says he didn't know what he was doing, and lets it go at that. Nor could he say more, for today it is called insanity to mention the underworld or any of what are called supernatural phenomena. Yet these phenomena are present to some extent in every man's life, but the fashion of recognizing them as such has changed for the worse. End footnote. He led me to a little used side door and let me out into the night unobserved by anyone else. Then that ghostly imp angel took me by the hand and led me for miles deep into the wooded countryside. Editor's note. So I came across an interview of Ray Palmer, who's the editor of Amazing Stories. Now, I've already mentioned Amazing Stories and I Remember Lemuria in the preface. Now, they were good friends as well, Ray Palmer and Richard Schaefer. They became quite good mates, good buddies. And Ray was also given personal experience of the voices coming up from underground. So Ray knew that Richard Schaefer was not a fraud. That when Richard said this is based on reality, these stories are based on reality, Ray did come to understand that Richard was telling him the truth. So this is the story. This story that I've just read about how Richard was in a normal prison. He says he was in a normal prison, and he got let out by a side door by the prison guard. It's actually not quite true. This is a little bit of fiction that Richard did introduce, because Richard was in fact, at this point in time, he must have been blabbering and must have been blabbering to people about the voices in his head. He must have gone to the police, or he must have gone to a hospital or something to try and get help. And he wasn't in an ordinary prison. He was actually in a mental prison, a mental asylum. They locked him away behind bars in a mental asylum. Now, it's understandable that he didn't write that he wrote that he was in an ordinary prison, because had he written that he was in a mental asylum as the introduction to all of his work, all of his writings, all of his science fiction, then surely nobody would have ever believed that he was telling the truth. And so that explains why he's written down that he was in a normal prison and that he had not discussed any of his voices with anybody except other prison mates. But the simple fact that his hand could be taken by, he says here that The ghostly imp angel took me by the hand. Now, if he was in his physical body and his right mind, how could an imp angel take him by the hand? No. He could see the imp angel. We can see these things, but we cannot touch them. They're not flesh and blood. All right. Within a thick grove she led me. End editor's note. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'll continue editor's note. Yes. So Ray Palmer, in a later interview, expressed his great disappointment, the shattering of his faith in Richard Shaver when he found out that Richard Shaver actually had spent 8 years in a mental asylum, basically in a coma. And that's where his flesh body was all of the time, that his etheric body. Now, I don't know that Ray talked about his etheric body. I didn't see Ray talking about that in the interview, and I have this interview, and the interview, Ray Palmer commenting on Richard Shaver, is here in my BitChute, list of videos. So you can look that one up below if you're looking at this on BitChute. If you're looking at this on one of my other platforms, then I will have the BitChute link in the description. My BitChute link in the description, and you can go through my BitChute videos. Actually, I might just put the link to the Ray Palmer video in the description. Yes, the BitChute. End editor's note. As I followed her transparent young form, behind me a vast door swung shut with a weird shriek. If love had not had me bemused, I would have been plenty scared, for I was in truth following a ghost into the interior of a small mountain. I knew that no one would know there was a door there, now that it was closed. Struth, I missed a bit. I missed the paragraph. Sorry. I'll go back to the start of that paragraph. Now, are we still going? Yes, still going. Then that ghostly imp angel took me by the hand and led me for miles deep into the wooded countryside. Within a thick grove she led me to a great gap in the rocky hillside. As I followed her transparent young form, behind me a vast door swung shut with a weird shriek. If love hadn't had me bemused, I would have been plenty scared, for I was in truth following a ghost into the interior of a small mountain. I knew that no one would know there was a door there, now that it was closed. The dim light inside the caves, I found, emanated from long tubes running alongside cavern walls. The cavern was alien. Vast sculptured rock forms of beings not human upheld the high carved arches of the roof that was a mountain overhead. The tubes contained some self-activating material which glowed. Once it was probably productive of a strong light, but now it gave off a dim glow. The girl sensed my thoughts and spoke. In other of the caverns there is brilliant light which can be switched on and off. Into this twilight the ghostly little figure continued to draw me. We emerged at length into a vast room, around which could be dimly seen huge mechanisms of incomprehensible uses. Beside one of these stood a soft, utterly enticing figure that was the duplicate of the phantom that had led me here. The screen still glowed brightly from use. As my footsteps rang on the ancient polished stone floor, this little figure raced toward me unerringly and threw herself into my arms. Her flower-red mouth sought mine like a starved animal scenting meat. As she left the receptor screen of the ancient mechanism, the phantom beside me disappeared abruptly. "Dick, my poor love, you are with me at last. It has seemed so long." Her voice was music to me, who had starved so long for the tender tones of this woman's voice. My arms went about her slender child's form. I leaned my face to those questing lips and learned more about love in 2 seconds than all the past of my life had taught me. The little witch had left the augmenter beam on me, and only those who have loved under those ancient impulse augmenters can understand the terrific depths of love. I knew that I had never really lived until that fierce moment when our love sprang into flaming life. At first I felt sure that Nydia could see me. Her intent wide eyes were fixed on me so surely, but she said, "Almost I see you. You seem much bigger now that you are here. My mind can see you in a way that you will learn too." I knew now that Nydia was blind. I looked about for the first time. I realised that little sweetheart was just poorly clad, not at all like the projection she had made of herself into my prison cell. I learned later that that projection she had made of herself into my prison cell was largely mental, so that her likeness went clad as she would have liked to be clothed. In reality, her garments were but a few well-worn rags. I myself could have wished I wore less than my prison denim, for the temperature was high, as it is in deep mines. Her fair hair, her large unseeing eyes, her paper-white skin were as I had seen them in my prison. The vast round space where we stood was surrounded by hulking, mysterious machines. They stood dimly gigantic in the faint light of the cavern lamps. I asked Nydia where her people were. She said with a little laugh that they were leaving us to ourselves at this moment of our meeting, but that I should meet them soon enough. "Oh, Dick, in many ways they are different from surface folk, and you must not let these differences disturb you. They are prepared to welcome you heartily because I love you and they love me. But it is not our custom to admit surface people to our hidden ways, for they are so apt to fear us and thus hate and be a danger to us. Greet them naturally, and show no fear or repulsion no matter how they look to you. We are different from the kind of human you are used to. We need men like you to aid us in our constant struggle with the living devils that inhabit much of these underground warrens. But when we try to approach men for this purpose, they fear the whole thing as madness or ghosts or whatever they have been taught. You see, we are forced to fight the devils because we wish evil to no one and cannot be glad when others suffer. And that is a way of life that all the evil and degenerate nomad bands hate and seek to destroy. The space within the mountain was an Aladdin's cave, beautiful beyond a modern man's imagination. The hall where Nydia next led me, saying it was a hall where the group met for any social purposes, was pillared by mighty metal simulations of trees, hung with crystalline jewel-like fruit. In every one of these great rooms stood several of the enigmatic ancient mechanisms, themselves beautiful of form and shimmering with prismatic colour. Some of the machines had a startling way of talking. When one neared them, they would speak in a strange tongue, beautiful sounding words of a meaning incomprehensible. That is a strange sensation, hearing a machine speak to you. I suspect they were equipped to announce their need of oil or other minor adjustment, as we equip mechanisms with red lights to indicate need for adjustment. The solid, gleamingly polished floor of rock was inlaid with weirdly beautiful designs and writings in symbols which I deduced were from the ancients' lost language, verses perhaps. Imperishable metal lounges, once probably covered with the shining fabrics which the gods alone could weave, stood beside the gleaming ancient mech, as the cavern people call the old machines. Mech, yes, they call mech as in short mech, mechanical machine, mechanism, mech, mesh. From the great machinery cavern, she led me into a smaller room, a strange mixture of metal superwork and old handmade wooden furniture that must have been brought into the room comparatively recently, though still centuries ago. We sat on a wooden bench that was half a log, split and with heavy oak pegs for legs. She told me of her people. They were but few, only 50 or so, living in the terrific abandoned splendour of the forgotten race who had built this god home. They had perhaps not read many books, though there were some modern books about, but they had read men's minds over the talog beams that penetrated the miles of the rock of the hills overhead, and was so conductive and augmentative one could read a man's mind with them many miles away. In some ways they knew more of life than does the ordinary man by far. It was not till later that I learned the fearful depths of their knowledge. They had at different times contacted surface people and tried to persuade such of them as were intelligent and able to join them. But they had been rebuffed from fear that their soft invitation to their mysterious retreat masked a snare or was a mental delusion. Editor's note. In the preface, Richard Shaver mentioned that many of these cavern cities are 6 miles steep or 10 kilometres. that they range from 1 mile to 6 miles deep, mainly, although there are deeper ones as well. Now it has, as I also mentioned in the preface, you can hear me talking about this, but I'll repeat it again. So these days, at this point in time, and I've listened to a whistleblower talking about this. I forget his name, but it was on Exopolitics, like Dr. Michael, what's his name, with Exopolitics. He had a guy interviewed, a whistleblower, a top secret guy who seems to know a lot about the caverns, and he's said, and I've heard this said for a number of years now, that the military of the White Hats, Donald Trump and company, Q, etc., all that stuff, they've been blowing up the underground caverns, especially the ones that are 10 kilometres deep. Well, why would they be blowing up all of the older caverns? That means that they are fully aware, because they've been there. They're fully aware of the nature of these caverns, that they have access to this machinery, that they've seen the floors, the polished stone floors with their symbols and their language, that they're studying all of this. And I do so hope that they're not actually setting nuclear bombs in these caverns and blowing them up. Indeed, I wonder if that would even be a geologically a sensible thing to do, because maybe the whole surface of the planet would start collapsing down if they started fracturing the rock beneath our feet with nuclear bombs. Anyway, end editor's note. From the great machinery cavern, she led me into a smaller room, a strange mixture of metal superwork and old hand-made wooden furniture that must have been brought into the room comparatively recently, though still centuries ago. Oh yes, I've already said this. They had at different times contacted surface people and tried to persuade such of them as were intelligent and able to join them, but they had been rebuffed from fear that their soft invitation by their mysterious retreat masked a snare or was a mental delusion. Yes, so that prompted me to think about how all of the military are down there these days. They ain't afraid anymore. It is always so, they would say and shrug. For those men who know of the ancient secret of the hidden people know also of the evil it has always done, and hence fear all who handle the rays, though many are wise and good and try to nullify the evil and reduce the torments inflicted by the degenerate and mad nomads of the caverns. Of the 50 in this group, there were no such evil people. Many of the cavern people came of clean and ancient stock that has striven for centuries to make the magic of the caverns the property of surface scientists of use to everyone. Ages of life in the dark had developed their senses in ways variant to surface folk. They had very large eyes, with great pupils adapted for sight in darkness, and over the long-range sensitive sight beams of the ancient ray mechanisms. Their skins were either a light brown, or a paper white, or a mottled, strangely lumpy appearance that comes of a fungus skin disease peculiar to the caverns. But under their strange exteriors there beat most warm and human hearts, and they opened these hearts to me because of Nidia's affection for me. A friend of Nidia, the little wisdom worker, was a friend of theirs. They had a complete comprehension of the terrific significance of the ancient secret of the God Cave's mechanisms and the value of a knowledge of their uses. But it is not, after all, so many years ago when all such people were burned as witches or sorcerers. They had a hearty fear of surface people's bungling hands getting hold of their way of life and ruining their freedom and their secret power completely. The fact that rickets is not common among them I attribute to the fact that the ancient race who built the ray mechanisms included a supply of those actinic rays which defeat tuberculosis and rickets and similar afflictions. They were, in truth, quite healthy. The health I attribute to their constant use of the ancient rays for one purpose or another, and those rays were built to be beneficial. Their great mental quickness is also due to this factor, as well as to the tell-all use, which accustoms them to handling great volumes of thought from many minds. Nidia, not alone among her kind, had vast plans and ideas for the future. She urged more surface contact for the purpose of developing a more intelligent use and understanding of the ancient science which had built the miraculous mechanisms. She had at last fallen in love with me, a surface man, and brought me with her into her cavern home. Among the cavern people, marriage is purely a personal matter. People either live together or do not, and it is no one else's business. I often think their attitude in this respect is the correct one. In the caves, when two people promise themselves to each other, they keep their promises, which is more than I can say for surface life. Nidia spent exactly 1 week showing me what happened to Tannhauser in the hollow hill of the Venusberg with Venus can still happen to mortal man. Editor's note. I don't know who wrote the story of Tannhauser in the hollow hill of the Venusberg with Venus, but that can certainly be looked up, and I will look that up and find out. Tannhauser, Tannhausser, so that's a German word, or a German name. Tannhauser, Tannhaus, brown house occupant. Hauser, person who lives in a house. Tan, brown. Okay. End editor's note. She had studied the uses of the antique pleasure ray mechanisms under masters, some of whom I met later. And for 1 week I experienced all the pleasure of a god's nuptials. Tremendous stimulation generators poured super-powered pleasure impulses through every nerve of my body at full capacity. If a man could die of pleasure, I think I would have died. But my tender-hearted Nidia was no slave of pleasure. She was a sweet, normal girl in love, and I learned more of that what infinite pleasure our life should hold for all of us in that week than ever surface man has for an eon. At the week's end, my little blind witch wife began to talk of other things than love. I will admit that I protested at length, but she gave me her reasons, quietly but firmly. There is much you must learn, you big innocent, if you would stay alive very long down here. We may at any time be attacked by savage, mad ray men from the evil groups. You do not know yet how to fight or work with these tremendous weapons. We cannot wait. You have promised to do as I say for 1 year. My purpose was this, that I might teach you in that year to be of value to us in such a fight. I nodded gravely, not in truth comprehending, but intrigued by the serious, capable air she had suddenly put on. I did not know my Nydia. I shall show you the true nature of those whom you must fight tomorrow or the next day. She led me to the great hall where I had first met her and paused before one of the vast machines. Her hand on the control, she swung the huge distance ray projector in a long arc across the distance. Almost immediately upon the visi screen, a scene of utter horror became visible. It was a hell with its devils at work. Do you see them, those things that should not live? I looked in horror upon the things that moved as men move upon the screen of life. They were a thing that could not possibly live except for the protection of the hidden caverns and the support of the great beneficial rays keeping their degenerate and evil carcasses in motion. Small, wizened, a stench of unwashed flesh and a stench as of a slaughterhouse was with them. They were a kind of goblin life, not any more human. Trolls, give them a name. They still must not live, but they do. Editor's note. Well, I'm reminded of the orcs that live underground. In Tolkien's works, maybe Tolkien was aware of what Shaver is talking about. End note. Dead they must have been but for the supply of super energy which the ancient generators poured through their bodies forever. These evil people must live on long after they would normally die, to become as undead as they were. It seems to be this fact that contributes to their evil nature, for the slow decay of their brains is energized by the synthetic electric life force, and the resultant thought is but the reflection of life upon the stagnating brain tissues. They hung over a balcony, watching a large white body below them that was being tortured by several similar but larger and more brutish-looking things. I cannot tell you what they were doing to him, but the refinements they had for the simple job of killing a man would make Einstein envy their source of invention. He was spread out, spider pattern, in thin strips for yards, and all of it still living under the beneficial ray's miracle force. And as he shrieked, the things giggled girlishly, horribly. The pit in which they were watching the horror stunk like a glue factory. and bits of decayed flesh and blood were everywhere. Editor's note: a glue factory. Glue used to be made from hooves of slaughtered animals such as horses, and especially horses. Horses' hooves were especially used for glue. Perhaps also cattle's hooves, pigs' hooves, any hooves. That's what a glue factory is, or was, back in those days. End note. The terrific augmentation of these nauseating features of the scene over the vast beam of the tellurg Nydia was using made me vomit, and Nydia shut off the power. Now will you learn how to fight, or would you rather fall into their hands? Said Nydia. I will study diligently, I assured my Nydia, and I meant it deeply. Then we will begin your education. The best way to learn to operate these terrific machines is to study the records left by those who built them. It is the way our best have learned always. The machine is called a dream mech, as the right name is unpronounceable by us. The records are thought records of the actual thought of elder race. You will learn not directly but indirectly, as the records are about all sorts of things, and one absorbs a knowledge of the uses and natures of the machines from the background thought of the record. So, I will start you on records we have which depict the beginning of man on earth, so that you may begin at the beginning, as it were. As I put different records on the dream mech, you will live different lives, and when I finish, you will know more about history from little Nydia than 1,000 colleges could teach you in a dozen lifetimes. For the colleges do not know what Nydia knows to be true of the past. Into yet another chamber she guided me, and placed me in a huge chair, like a giant's dental chair. There were several flexible metal strips which she fastened about my wrists and waist. Then she took a strange helmet, fastened to a heavy cable, and placed it on my head. Lie back and relax. You will soon be another person entirely. Don't let the sensation of being two people at once worry you. It does not last long. This is the greatest experience the wisdom of the caverns can offer you. These are the thought records of the ancient gods. Those which I will play for you are the records of the beginnings of life as we know it on earth, and the records of the Messiah which we got from some Jewish ray in the Mediterranean. We killed them. We killed them, and this record of the Messiah was among their possessions. It is a strange thing that the gods did leave a saviour for men, and men killed him, was true, but he was not the Christ, though Christ did know him. But enough of talk. Goodbye, you are going on a long journey. I saw her throw a Titan-sized switch on the wall, and in a flash, a dream life more vivid than actual life by 100 powers seized me. And that's the end of chapter 1. So, editor's note, and she says when Nydia said that they killed them, she didn't mean she killed the Jews, she meant she killed the devils that had recorded this Jewish event. Right? So they killed the devil. Her and her friends, they killed the devils that had made the record. So we killed them, and this record of the Messiah was among their possessions. Rightio, I'll end it here.